The Dragon's Return, Chapter 28, Sigil.
You know, I had a thought.
Arthur said, looking up from the paper he'd been mulling over. Merlin raised an eyebrow at him. Did it hurt? She asked. He rolled his eyes as the knights around the table snickered. They'd invited the round table to a small dinner held in one of the lesser-used side halls. Arthur was still working on an order for an actual round table. He thought it would be simple, but the logistics of where to put the damn thing was giving him a headache. So they were at a long rectangular table instead. Wedding planning was a nightmare, and Arthur wanted some input and to go over a few things with his knights who hadn't been through a tournament before. Despite Merlin's protestations, it was tradition to celebrate a royal wedding with a tournament.
Hush, you. You lot don't have sigils. Knights born of noble families use their family crests for the lists, but you lot are in a unique position. You'll have to choose your own, and soon, if you want to participate.
Arthur pointed out. Is there any knight who isn't participating for the honor of our soon-to-be queen? Gawain said, winking at Merlin as he lifted his cup. She rolled her eyes at him.
I had actually thought of this, though, princess,
he said, taking a drink of his wine. Well, what'll it be then? Crossed swords, battle axes? Elian asked. Gawain shook his head.
A single red rose on a green field,
he said, raising confused eyebrows from all those around the table, except Merlin.
Why?
Lancelot asked curiously.
My little sister's name was Rose. She passed when I was young, maybe 14, I honestly don't remember exactly, but Camelot is the kind of place she would have loved.
Or at least we're working on it. He said, lifting his cup again, this time to Arthur, who nodded to him, smiling lightly.
Never knew you had a sister,
Percival said quietly.
Only one of you thought to ask, and even then, well, I was drunk as a skunk and more likely to talk.
Gawain said with a teasing grin. Merlin rolled her eyes again. What about you then, Percy? What will you choose? He asked, picking up the jug of wine to pour himself another.
Hadn't thought much about it. I'm enjoying Elian's idea of cross battle axes, though. Maybe black ones on gray?
He said, taking the jug from Gawain, who let out a protest. Elian rolled his eyes.
You're lucky I didn't want that one, he said. I was thinking a smith's anvil, so no matter what, I never forget where I came from. That anyone can do it if they try and end up in the right place at the right time.
Gwen raised her cup at Elian from beside Lancelot, her smile just slightly sad.
What about you, Lancelot? A griffin, on blue.
Lancelot said without hesitation. Gwen nodded, smiling at her husband. Merlin frowned. Why the griffin? You killed the damn thing, but still wouldn't let me give you credit for it, she pointed out, confused.
You killed the griffin. We both know the lance wouldn't have done anything if you hadn't stepped in. You did the majority of the work,
Lancelot pointed out.
But without the griffin, I would have made it to Camelot just to be turned away cold. I would not be where I am today if I hadn't seen it in the woods trying to run you down. The griffin did what?
Arthur asked, glancing between Lancelot and Merlin. Oh, relax, Arthur, that was years ago. Merlin soothed. If you want to go that route, you could go for a scroll. I mean, we did commit a little bit of identity fraud that week as well, Merlin said, taking a sip of her wine. Gawain snorted, spraying wine at Leon, who took up his napkin with a resigned look.
Prancelot committed identity fraud?
He gasped, looking like Yule had come early, even through the wine catching in his beard.
Technically, I committed identity fraud for Lancelot,
Merlin said, shrugging, as Lancelot shot her a look. At the time, it was the only option.
He agreed to commit identity fraud,
Elian said, eyeing his brother-in-law with what might have been respect.
It took some convincing,
Merlin said. Arthur took her cup and swapped it with his, which was full of water. Oi!
I think you've had enough, if you're telling stories like that,
Arthur said, fondness softening his look of exasperation.
Arthur's right,
Gwen said, looking amused at the memory. You're lucky there aren't any servants here, she pointed out. No, I noticed there aren't any servants here. I notice more than you lot give me credit for, Merlin pointed out, picking up a chicken leg from the platter in front of her and tossing it at Ilios, who ate it whole, bone and all. She came up to Merlin's waist, and Arthur had fielded more than one request from the kennel master to breed Merlin's dog with one of their prized hounds from the kennels. Aethusa huffed from his place draped across the back of Merlin's chair like the cat he was disguised as. He would soon grow too large for that disguise as well. Merlin grinned and tore a chicken thigh in half, tossing it behind her for the white dragon to catch. Arthur smiled slightly, taking a sip of Merlin's wine. What about you, Merlin? You don't have a sigil, Leon pointed out. She grinned. Oh, but technically I do.
My mother's sigil doesn't count,
Arthur teased. I wasn't talking about that, she said, waving him off and pulling a leather cord out from under the collar of her dress. On it rested 2 rings. Arthur frowned as Merlin pulled one of them off and laid it on the table. My father sent it to me before last Samhain, she said, clearing her throat and nodding as Arthur reached for the ring. It was a signet ring. The band was silver. The face somehow had Ilios's scale pressed into it. He would recognize that blue anywhere. He had no idea how Balinor had managed it, but pressed into the dragon scale was the image of a bird in flight. A falcon, by the shape.
A Merlin,
he said, grinning at her as he passed the ring to a curious Gwen, at a nod from Merlin.
How appropriate,
he said, wrapping his hand around hers. He frowned. Her skin had gone cold, as if she'd been standing outside in the dead of night without her cloak. She must have spotted his worry. You know I run colder after the Daraka. One of the last spells my father ever cast was on that ring, she whispered after double-checking that they were alone. It helps me stay a bit warmer, she said as the knights quickly passed the ring back to her. She slipped it back onto the cord and back around her neck. Not that I would know anything about this, but wouldn't it work better if you wore it as a ring? Leon asked, sounding confused in no small amount. Probably, but I don't think I'm ready for that, Merlin said with a small smile. What's the other ring? Gawain asked. My friend Will gave it to me years ago, Merlin said, causing all the knights, save Arthur, to raise eyebrows. Why have we never met this Will? Elian asked. Because he's dead, Merlin said shortly. Silence fell after that. Gawain coughed into his goblet, which he found empty. Frowning, he reached for the jug, only to have Leon pull it away from him and replace it with a jug of water. You have training in the morning. You'll regret it if you drink any more, he pointed out. All right, Killjoy, what's your sigil? Gawain asked, grumbling as he poured himself a cup of water. I use my family sigil, a silver lion's head in orange, Leon said, pouring himself a goblet of wine. Like I said, Killjoy, Gawain said, pulling light laughter from the others around the table.